from Marketing for Hippies, and I'm joined by my friend Javan Bernakevitch, who's in Victoria, and I am in Edmonton, and we are chatting about niching. And so I've been chatting with a lot of my colleagues about this over the last while, but I'm super excited for this conversation because Javan is one of the only people I'm talking to niching about who actually works directly in ecology, which is where the term comes from, is most relevant. So thanks for joining, Javan. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Dad. It's great to talk to you.
I know, this is like the first professional thing we've ever done together.
Very much is.
So, man, I hardly know where to start because, so I sent you some questions. You'd sent me some answers, sort of a brief thoughts, and I guess the place I want to start. So maybe if you could actually just say a bit about who you are, what you do, and maybe just a bit about permaculture in general, because that will probably segue us nicely in.
Sure. Well, for everybody, my name is Javan Bernakevitch. I own and operate Permaculture BC. It's an education, consultation, and installation company. So what we do is not only do we educate people in permaculture and different aspects of regenerative living, but we also design small and large properties ranging from urban sites to broad acres, so ranging from 5 to 200 or plus acres. I've been in permaculture now for roughly 4.5 years and been working with people like Jeff Lawton, Seth Holzer, and other folks who've been working in Western Canada and Canada in general for the last 20 to 25 years, really networking with them and learning from them and mentoring from them. My other focus is really connecting people within permaculture, and so we've created a few interesting community connection hubs, and they really epitomize what niching is, and niching really is where the needs of one element within a system meets the yields of another. Sometimes it's called an opportunity in time or an opportunity in space. And when you have all these things come together, you have the ability to either A, identify that niche, and B, step into it, or you have the ability to assemble something within there to connect all the pieces. So one of these connection hubs is a Permablitz website. And Permablitz is a neat idea that was created in 2004 and 2005 in Melbourne, Australia. So we take the word permaculture, which I'll get to in a second, meaning permanent culture on the planet. How do we have that for in perpetuity? And then the other one is Blitzkrieg, which is lightning fast attack. So how can we have a lightning fast attack of permanent culture on the planet? And it's a great website for people to connect and to understand about permaculture hands-on. So somebody will host a day of Permablitz, and they'll have a site and they'll have a plan that's drafted up, and then what we'll do is we'll jump into it and we'll convert an entire lawn to a garden within 8 hours with 15 people. Was the very first one that the Permablitz network put on. So what this all comes down to is, what is permaculture? It's one of the largest questions, and there's an old joke: if you ask 200 permaculturalists what permaculture is, you'll get about 300 answers, because some of them is at the top. And talk more than maybe you want to be listening for, but a concise definition is, if we're in a paradigm today which is people first, and it's been people first for at least a few thousand years, and we understand intrinsically that we need to move to a place that has a paradigm of people first and earth first, or ecological health and preservation being first, because it is what substantiates us, then permaculture ends up becoming the vehicle for the tools, theories, people, and the skills to bring us from paradigm A to paradigm B. The sub-definition underneath that is that permaculture is a science, ethical-based design system based on nature to provide for local needs.
Bam! Nicely done. That was impressive. That was really clear, which is unusual for permaculture. So, very good. So, the thing I want to jump back to is this idea of needs and yields, because I feel like this is such a core concept in permaculture. But it was interesting when I was reading your responses, like, this is such a great way to think about niching. And so maybe if you could speak about those, like needs and yields, and give some examples of that, and then we can explore how that connects to niching.
Yeah, I'd love to. Permaculture for me has been a life changer. It's been a design changer, and what I like so much about it is that it takes a lot of the emotion out of how we look at life and how we look at our design. It doesn't exclude it. It says that there's a place and a time for it, but it also says that there's a time to rationally, logically process through pieces of our design, and then to also add the emotional human content, because that is as important. We have both sides of those brains that like to pull towards those dichotomies, but yet we are the masters of our own brains that start to integrate those two sides. And within this, we have a concept and a design idea called analysis of an element. And this is where we have a single element within our system, and maybe we're thinking of putting this element in. And the ubiquitous example in permaculture is the permaculture chicken. And so you have a chicken, and the chicken has some needs. It has things that it requires for its function. So it needs air, it needs dirt to scratch, it needs other chickens, it needs food, it needs shelter. It has all of these needs, but it also produces yields. It also produces eggs and meat. Those are the ones we commonly think of. It produces manure. It produces CO2. It produces, some chickens fight. It produces behaviors associated with predation. Some chickens, you know, when you see a predator around a chicken, it really harkens back to when chickens' genetics started off in prehistoric birds and then going into dinosaurs, and they look like tiny velociraptors running back and forth. And these, if we take a step back as the designer, as the person who's working with the system, we can take a look and we see that is a yield of that element. So every individual, every element, everything has needs it requires to provide its function, and also while creating or while fulfilling its function, it produces multiple aspects.
Awesome. Right. So another way, I mean, I could see saying this is, no, I guess it's not the full thing is everybody's got gifts to give in the world, and that they do give, and give just as a byproduct of being. Some people are just really funny when you're around them. Some people bring a real sweet depth, you know, or some people really good at asking questions. Some people are good hosts. So those are, it might be like the yields that people have, some examples. But then people do have needs. We need to eat, we need shelter, and all of this. So, oh man, there's so many places to go with this, because I feel like the needs and yields thing is so interesting. But maybe the place to focus on is you were talking about in your answers of how like there were two examples, but the first one was about a tree, and how if you plant a tree, suddenly it creates a new dynamic where you've got like the sunny side and the shady side, which it's the new sort of input, you know, into the environment. It's this new thing there, and then that somehow creates opportunities for new niches. Can you share that example? Or
yeah, I'd love to. This was created out of a scientific journal paper, and the concept was called the niching principle. And the principle is thus that because there are abiotic factors in our world, because there is sun, there's wind, there are things that we do not actively create or actively generate. When we harmonize with those energies that are coming across a site, we have the ability to identify a niche. So for a quick example, on the north side of a house in the northern hemisphere, you're going to have a shadier environment. On the south side, you're going to have a sunnier environment. Of course, in the southern hemisphere, it reverses. But in the northern hemisphere, where you know, I am, and where Tad, you are, and maybe some of the viewers are, this is an idea where as soon as we place an element, we place a house, we have created two new niches at a minimum, if not a multitude, because we work in a three-dimensional environment, not only above ground, but below ground as well. And so the idea with a house or with a tree or even with a business, and this is very true of a larger part of my work now, which is working with new graduates of permaculture and helping them to find their personal niche as it exists within permaculture, is as soon as we place a tree in the soil, as soon as we decide to plant that, as soon as we consciously make that decision, on the north side there is going to be a shadier, a cooler, and a moister environment. So on the south side there's going to be a sunnier, there's going to be a drier, and a warmer environment, which means now as soon as we make an implementation into the landscape, there is innumerable amounts of niches that we've created. And so part of being a designer, there's a permaculture adage that the only limit to yield is the designer's imagination. And it is our own ability to
not only think outside the box, but take a knife to the box, collapse it, and use it for sheet mulching, which is a gardening technique. But also to really understand that we have the ability, as we niche and as we place different elements, to understand that there are more niches that are created. So in this weekend, I was teaching an introduction to permaculture course, and there's this big concept of a guild. And a guild is a human-created ecosystem that has multiple elements that meet the needs and yields of each other to create this ecosystem. And the way I like to describe it is, permaculture, we have something called the permaculture flower. Basically, it has the 4 cardinal directions and then the 4 diagonal directions. And if we place a key species in the middle, on the north side, again, it's going to be, in the northern hemisphere, this is going to be cooler, moist, and a bit wetter. And then on the south side, it's going to be opposite. And on the east and the west side, in the morning, it's going to be a little bit of the southern attributes of that niche, but in the PM, in the afternoon, it starts going to look more like the northern side, and vice versa on the different sides, because again, we live in a 3-dimensional environment. So when we place this into context of businesses, when we place this into context of what we do within permaculture called right livelihood, this is creating a livelihood that exists for ourselves, for our families, and for our community to have ecological preservation of health and also human preservation of health. When we take a look at a business that has decided to establish themselves, they create multiple businesses around them. The easiest one to come up with is Apple. So when Apple comes out with a new product, there's peripheral devices, there are cases, there are new screen covers. There's all of these things that are re-engineered again because they are a niche outside of the item. But in the same way, in Right Livelihood, when we have a business sets up and they're doing edible landscaping, they not only strengthen the ties to the other niches, the other businesses in the community that will supply the needs for that business, but there will be yields from that business. Say this edible landscaping company, they just want to install, and they just want to install because that is their own personal niche. They are great installers. And so what they do is they guild or they make connections with other businesses to take on maintenance, to take on potentially further education on preservation of the bounty, of the harvest as we go into the winter. Or other aspects. So every single time we create a niche or create an element or create something within the sphere of our design, and that could be our lives, that could be our gardens, it could be our businesses, we create numerous opportunities for other businesses to spring up and to support us and really have their talents and their love, which is the most important thing. You may have talent, but if you don't love it, it's just a thing, right? It's just something that you put energy into. And then they can start to synergistically work with us in a holistic sense.
Yeah. So it's one of the things I love about this as a just sort of philosophy or orientation is that sort of instead of looking at other things in the environment as competition, there's this seeing them as they're giving a yield which creates more opportunities, and we can be thoughtful and create partnerships and strategic alliances and all this with other people who offer other things. So I think of myself, I focus on this sort of more general marketing stuff, focusing on the niching these days, but I don't work with people on their bios. But my colleague Nancy Jutton does, and she's great with it. So whenever somebody has that, I usually send them to her. Or, if people need help with designing a website, I'll send them to my friend Kim Tanasichuk, who does websites, and because I don't do that. So I love that spirit of kind of collaboration. And it also was making me think about how, well, here's a question for you. It just had me wonder, does a niche start from the yield or the need? Or is it the intersection of them both? It's like, because there's two different ways in business of looking at this idea of niche. One is, you look outside you and you see, okay, there's this community of people that have a need. There's all these people, golfers with pain in their knees. That's the need. So I'm going to create a business to help those golfers with the pain in their knee. And then the flip of it might be, I'm really good at helping people with pain in their knees. That's a gift that I have. And, who needs this? And then golfers. And I'm just curious what your sense of in terms of how niches get created, of the interplay between the needs and the yields.
Mm-hmm. I love your example because it showcases what I've come to and have helped people to understand with permaculture design, which is if we work backwards and if we try to meet the needs of other people without taking into consideration, is what we naturally do a yield for what they need? So do we naturally have the answer for them? Or do we have to spend a lot of time, energy, and resources to create the need for their yield? Usually that eats up our time, our energy, and we ultimately get frustrated, and we usually drop that at some point because it becomes too much for us because it's not self-sustaining on a personal level. I had a few students this weekend call me a niche-making machine because what I love to do is I love to listen to the student and I love to think about it and I love to say, okay, great, so you love this and you're good at this, that's where we start. So instead of going on the backward side and a great quote, I always forget who it's by, but don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive. What the world needs is people who come alive. True, but the next step off of that is what the planet needs, people who come alive, because you are in a self-supporting regenerative state when you are at that place. If you're not hungry to get up and take care of the things that you love to do during the day, eventually you're going to come up against a wall at some point during the day and you're going to go, I'm done. I'm sick and tired of this. This isn't what I want to be doing. I love that people have pain in their knees. I love that, I adopt them. But if I take a look at one more knee, I swear I will cut off my own knees and I'll never look at them again. And you can see people get super frustrated by this. And I'm sure you see these people as well. And in the same way as we're talking about niching with business, I really focus on helping permaculturists. We help focused on regenerative technicians, earth repair technicians, to connect with what is alive within them, what is absolutely pushing to be expressed, and then to connect with what their love is in permaculture, and then to start designing a niche around that first. So what is it they do naturally that they love to do, that they can express themselves in, and then let's go and find the community. Let's connect with the people and let's have them connect together. And so once that piece is done, once I work with them on that, more often than not, and you don't know this yet, but I'm sending them to you. I'm saying, Tad is the guy who can help you to further express what that is and help to connect with those different hubs. But I really like working with people and helping them to design that, because I find that permaculture design does both. It designs your property and it designs your life because it's principle-based. In permaculture, the thinking is revolutionary, the solution is just interesting. And so, rolling all the way back, the needs and yield, I would say you start with the yield of the person, because that is surplus that you have. And then see who else could use that surplus. And when you have that connection, you have interplay dynamics, which create economy. They create the management of the household. And the last thing I'll say is, you talk about competition. Competition originally comes from the Latin word of compito, which is to strive with, not to strive against. So again, when we take a look at the words, we have to see who is speaking them and who are using them, and what is their agenda. Because the competition for me is to strive with each other, but to do so in a conscious way. Is there any way that we can start to fill out our niches more so, and then start to blend the edges with other businesses? And the great thing about permaculture is that we always talk about the edge and the action on the edge, how much, when we have more interface with other businesses, when we have more interface with other systems, we're more productive and we're more stable in a long-term situation.
I love it. So I'm curious if you can give some examples of niches that you've helped students come up with, or that you've seen, or that you've noticed and been like, oh, this would be a great niche. And are there any that come to mind that you've helped students come up with or explored with them, or stories?
Yeah, sure, that'd be great. So out of the last permaculture design certificate I ran, which is a 72-hour flagship way of learning permaculture, it's based on the work of Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and it's a standardized course across the world. I started to add in this Finding Your Niche in Permaculture module at the end of the course. And so towards the end, actually on the last day after all the designs are done and the celebration is just a glow in their eyes, we start talking about what they're passionate about. And so this last course we ran, we had about 6 students right after the course out of 23 who went off, and in 2 weeks' time were either A, started their business, or B, they were halfway along. And partly it's because you know, and a lot of books say this, you know, the art of the start is one of these seminal books within business, and the condensed version is just start. And that really does come down to it. Start connecting with people who are interested, or start, you know, working at what you're doing. But what I found is that all these folks, as we were going through and finding their niches, they were already a glimmer in their eye. And so in some ways, it wasn't so much creating a niche for them or helping them to design a niche. It was, okay, so you've already thought of these things. These are already existing, and you've had a thought, a dream. Somebody has said to you, oh, you know what, Tad, you're such a ham, and you just love to play with magic. I wonder if you've ever thought about that. And it's really those things that, you know, our parents, and specifically our grandparents, some of those people who were removed from us at childhood, who would see us at these thin slices throughout our lives, and they would say something to us, and we'd be going, oh, okay, that's interesting. You know, they're always saying that I'm an artist. They're always saying that I like to draw. They're always saying, like, I like to talk to people. And those are pretty basic things, but when we harmonize with the basics, or the mainframe of the human design, we talk about the mainframe of the property design, which is usually earthworks and usually allowing water to infiltrate into the earth. The same is true for the person. If we design for infiltration of life energy to come into the human and just harmonize with the natural topography of the person, then we have the ability to allow them to do what they love and be really successful. So in this course, we had about 6 students, and I found out there was another 2 afterwards. And a few of the designs that we had, the light designs we had, were really focusing on something called food forestry. So it's become a bit of a hot topic, the idea of putting different perennial species together in a polyculture, a many-culture, so that way they meet the needs and yields of each other, and they grow up into a forest of food. The idea being, when you walk into a forest, it doesn't need to be watered, doesn't need to be fertilized, and we can create these systems, these interplay systems that, coming towards maturity and climax, they take more and more care of each other, and the human gets to step back. Another one that we came up with was, this was a woman who called me for a consult out from the East Coast. She loved food and she loved permaculture, and she said, I want a way to work with permaculture and food and people. I said, well, what do you like to do with food? And she's like, I love to cook food. And I said, well, have you thought about working with local populace? And we had found out that she was really interested in working with kids, working with schools, and then doing guest cooking, or doing cooking instruction around some of the new vegetables and fruits that we have forgotten in conventional society, or we've cast aside because of industrial food system, and starting to bring that up. So she's been actually quite successful over the last couple of months since we've spoken. Another business that worked out brilliantly is about to work out brilliantly. I can't talk about it too quickly, but a good friend of mine is putting together a great permaculture T-shirt company. Inevitably, there are those of us that love to wear our thoughts and our patterns expressed to everyone else, and so, you know, it would happen eventually. And so he's currently launching permaculture.com, which it's not live yet, but folks should definitely check it out in the next couple of weeks, because he'll be launching probably in November, December, or thereabouts. So that was a great conversation we had probably a year ago, and he finally had the time and acted on it recently. A couple other businesses were edible landscaping businesses. And the other one was somebody who wanted to really go into propagation, that's making more plants. And I said, you know what nobody's doing here? Nobody is doing aquatic plants. Nobody's doing edible aquatic plants. Nobody's doing it in the Western Canada. We need somebody to do that. And this is what really comes up, and other permaculture teachers will tell you something similar, is that as we start to work with students, and as we start to design ourselves, and we start to expand our own base of services, we go out to the community and we're like, okay, well, we need this thing and it's not there. And so what we do is, you know, we continually tell students, like, this is open if anybody's interested. We need lots of this material. We need lots of this service. I've been working with one of my students to become specifically a permaculture map illustrator, and he's further moved into landscape architecture to facilitate that, not only for himself but for other permaculture designers. And so now he's becoming the go-to for mapping and for output for clients. So you know, I was an artist for quite a long time, and I found that my designs would stay on my desk for weeks after I needed to. And what I needed to do was start to guild with somebody who could quickly and effectively put together a design, who well, it's an artist in their own right, but their artistic constriction wasn't that it had to be perfect in this specific way. And so the guild with him worked out brilliantly as well, because now we had the ability to have a quick turnaround on design and quickly come back to the client and have them have a graphic representation that was very accurate. So that's been very productive as well. We've had maggot farmers, so folks who grow maggots for chicken feed and for fish feed. We've had another great island food forest company that came out of a few of our courses, and they just specialize in doing food forest for islands. We have, I like playing with business and I like playing with niche. And so I recently created a shoots company, which is the first 3 to 5 inches of growth of seeds grown in soil. So pea shoot, sunflower shoot, radish, buckwheat. And we started it in January. The business was up and running in 8 weeks. We sold out our first crop, and we've been pretty successful since. But I've got a lot of travel coming up in design around the world and some aid projects, and so we realized it was time to sell. And one of my students came up and said, "I'd really like to buy that business. That's the business I always wanted to work in, but I never had the desire to make a business," which brought to me a whole new niche, which is you could just be a business maker. You could just make businesses. You could make regenerative businesses, regenerative, right, lively businesses that were good for the people, the planet, and as well as your own pocketbook. And then you could connect with other people who were not starters, they were maintainers. Because one of my things is I'm a starter. I love to begin, I love to start, I love the energy of it, but once it comes into maintenance, it doesn't meet my functions as an element in my own system. I don't maintain it. It's not something that I do naturally. It's something I have to work at. And so now that I've created this new business, this Shoots and Leaves shoot business here in Victoria, I put it out to my community and my student base, and I had great response. And you know, I think several say, "That's my business. That's the one I need." And so we've now sold the business, and I explained to my mom now to say, yes, I teach and I design and I install, but I can also play on the side and make new businesses and long plays, and then if students are interested, I can sell them off or pass them off or start to create more income there. So we've had a lot of success working with students and applying permaculture to those to create design lives, design economy, and design right livelihood.
That's awesome, man. Those are so great. So I'm hearing so when you work with the students, there's this question of sort of where I'm curious, because you actually had a great exercise I'd love to, I remember we talked about it over New Year's, and but it seems like you're looking at, like, what are you passionate about? What are you interested in? What is it about permaculture that draws you? What are your strengths? What are you good at? Sort of, as you would say, what are the functions of your system? What are your gifts? And then looking out in the community, and how could that be applied? Where would that fit? Where's that sort of overlap of what you've got and what the community needs? And seems like that's kind of the niche. But it was also just striking me how, it's like as more people, let's say, start doing permaculture design, they go to somebody's home, like, great, we'll put it in a garden here. Then all of a sudden that person might need fertilizers and stuff that aren't chemicals. And so then people who do make compost, and the compost tea where you kind of just make the liquid, spray stuff, that those people suddenly might be needed. And then how many opportunities that opens up for other people. But I'm curious if you could walk through what is the exercise that you take students through to help them figure out their niche? Because I remember you had like a whole kind of system for it that I thought was super brilliant.
Yeah. The exercises have developed into about 6 or 7 at this point, and there's more that are being added, because it's one thing to connect with people and start to ask, what are your gifts and what are your strengths, but then you have to take a step back even further, and you have to ask them, okay, well, what do you want? Like, what are you looking for in life? And so a lot of this has become life design. A lot of this has become even bigger, but the core design exercise that we were talking about was using a few different design methodologies within permaculture, and one of them is called zones. And zones is an idea where if you...
What is it? How do you spell that?
Zones, Z-O-N-E-S.
Right.
When you're taking a look at a property, zone 0 is always the place where human initiative begins. It is where the human initiative begins and moves outwards into the site. And zones are merely a strategy to start placing elements in your site for frequency of visit and for energy reserved to take care of those pieces. So, for example, in Zone 1 are the things that you see on a daily basis around your house. So we try to cluster those things together because you'll see them and you'll walk by them. Two really great stories about that is Bill Mollison has a great what about calling it the fuzzy slipper test, I think is what he calls it, the fuzzy slipper test. And the idea is if you go out in the morning for your omelet, if you go out for the herbs for your omelet, for cooking inside, if you go outside to go get your herbs, and you come back and your fuzzy bunny slippers are wet, then the herbs are too far from the house. And so there's these tests, there's these interesting feedback loops to let us know, okay, is the thing I'm using too far away? And usually the feedback of this is that the item, either the element or the item or the system usually degrades, so it usually fails, or it overgrows, or there's something that happens. In my front lawn, I have a really large raised bed that's about 5 feet tall. So when we walk by it in the morning, we have all of our medicinals and our lettuces on there that we pick when we come back. And so zones are a way to sort of structure within the property when we go and how we go to them and how we come back to them. So I started thinking, well, how does this work for people? Because zones is just a principle, it's just a strategy. It's where we place things and where things are placed within our system for the frequency of use and the intensity of use.
Well, and if I can just interject here, what strikes me about this that's so important is when people are designing any kind of system, they're designing their lives, their business, when things don't work or things aren't getting done, the response is usually, well, I just need to hunker down and work harder, and like more effort, which can work short term. And some people that can work their whole life, it just burns them out because they're always having to work. And what I love about permaculture as an approach is it's this question of how do we make it easier instead? How do we design it so that, I can't remember who I heard the quote from, but permaculture quote was work is a flaw in the design, that it's like if you set things up right, it happens more effortlessly. And because I see so many entrepreneurs beat themselves up, and it's like, oh, I guess I don't have what it takes, or it's like, well, maybe it's also that the way you're designing your business is working against you, and if you just change some things, it could be a lot easier.
Yeah, it's a brilliant quote. Work is a deficiency of design. And part of that is, okay, so if you have to work, there's an issue. But the other part of it is, if you have to really exert yourself, maybe this isn't the aspect of the design that you should have in your system. So if, and to quote you, what type of marketing works? The one you'll do, right? The marketing you'll do is what works because you have energy for it. So in the same way, I started to do this design exercise with folks, and what it's called is zones of brilliance and zones of permaculture interest. So you are the element that's at the bottom of zone 0, and you have zones of brilliance, things that come to you naturally that you love, and then you have things further out into zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that you don't naturally do well, and that you think you should do. And this is really where we get into the issues with living in puritanical, anti-participatory, isolationist North America. Right? You must do this. This is what you must do. And I was working on this design exercise with a great friend of mine who's an author and a brilliant permaculturalist, and I was going through it with her, and we were going through her zone 0 skills, and it was community building, and it was bioremediation, which was remediating soils and landscapes, and it was community activism, it was teaching, it was being it was sort of off-the-cuff education. And then we got to the idea of mapping. And she goes, oh, I'm terrible at mapping. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I hate it. It takes me so long. This is the year I really need to, work at mapping. And you could just see her whole body, like, getting slower and starting to work. And I said, well, have you ever thought that maybe this is like a zone 5 skill? This is a skill that maybe you shouldn't touch. Maybe this is a skill that you should pass on to somebody else, so that way, if it takes 10 minutes of your energy to map just 1 unit of mapping, and it takes somebody else 1 unit of mapping to complete 1 unit of mapping, then what's called your ROEI, your return on energy investment, is ridiculously low for you, but ridiculously high for them. So now we have a testing question, if you will, that says, okay, we can start to say, this is not a skill you should be putting your time into. But because she felt that it was taught in permaculture that she should be a master at everything, she really got into this. She painted herself into this tight little corner where she couldn't get out cognitively. She was like, I have to be good at this. And the best example there, nature gives us all the examples. 4.5 billion years has tons of success. You know, nature does everything right. If something goes wrong, it's because we've made a misstep, and she always wants to do it right. And when we were looking at her design, I said, listen, you know, flowers and pollinators grow up and evolve together. There's an interplay. There's certain flowers that can only be pollinated by certain pollinators because they can reach into the flower cup. There's certain birds that have specific beak types for drilling, for cracking, for insect. You know, all of these are specialists. They're specialists within the field, understand a lot around their world, and permaculture is a way to understand your world and become a generalist, but to also have a speciality to become a niche filler, to have your yields meet somebody else's needs. And as we were going through this, her relief was, well, it was physical, audible, and just so ever present because she didn't have to worry about it anymore. She goes, I don't have to be a mapper. I'm like, no, you never did. You get to be this amazing zones of brilliance in your zone 0, and you can dabble in zone 1 and kind of go out to zone 2 sometimes and maybe bring them a little bit closer with some work. But, you know, bookkeeping for me is not my favorite thing to do. I did it for the first couple of months so I could understand it and understand how it worked. And then I said, this is taking me far too much time. And so I I companion planted myself with a friend of mine who was a bookkeeper who took one of my classes, and we had economic exchange through currency, and we also had economic exchange through courses and through design work. And so we had another alternative economy there. We had another connection point. And when you trade with somebody, this is a huge thing. When you trade with somebody or barter with somebody, there is something else that happens socially. There's something else that happens in community. You start to see the other person. You start to see their joy and their delight. And it's not just, oh, thank you for the money, because money is so I can eat and so I can live. And if they're into a midlife piece where they have the golden handcuffs and they have to have a mortgage, which is French for death pledge. We just have to make sure everyone understands that. And their kids and everything else they feel like they need to be in. And that money becomes this burden. But when we start to move into alternative economies, which is such a brilliant way to start to extract ourselves from economic ways of being that try to constrain and confine and really placate and tame us, we come into a place where we can understand that we are independent beings who can harmonize with our own desires and our own yields. And we can give those things to the world, and we can say, I'm going to continue to become better at this. This is what I would like to serve my community in. This is what I would like to become a craftsman in. And so this design method was basically taking a map of the person and then starting to fill out zone 0 of their zones of brilliance and starting to fill out zone 0 of their permaculture interest. And some people, things in permaculture they don't like. Some people do not like worms, and that's fine. That's great. It's even better if you know that. That way you never have to touch a worm until you kind of get into that place that you're excited about it. And this is the other big thing. Unless zone 0 is full and happy, there's not a lot of energy for zone 1 or zone 2 or zone 3. So it comes back to this adage that when your own cup overfloweth, there is room for others, or there is surplus for others. And so out of those two zone zeros, what we do is we go through a design process to start identifying niches for the client, for the person who's working on it.
So when you say, what are the two different zone zeros?
The one zone 0 is called your zones of brilliance.
Yeah.
The things that you love and you're good at. Mm-hmm. Not just the things you're good at, but the things you love and you're good at because you have surplus for them. And the other one were the zones of permaculture interest. So the things that you naturally gravitate to during a PDC or permaculture design certificate or some sort of education that you're taking in and understanding the different facets of permaculture.
So I could see that if somebody was like a life coach, it's like, okay, you were going through this life coach training. There's probably a lot of different elements. What were the parts of that grabbed you the most? Or, if you're a holistic practitioner, you learned a lot. What was it that you learned that really lit you up and that you think you're really good at? Or, or I guess there's that. And then, what are you really good at and what lights you up? And I like that.
Yeah. And then from there, we build a niche. We build all the different attributes of a niche. And so we build the social, the biological, and the financial. Because those are the three facets when you are building a business in earth care, in regenerative earth repair technician aspects that you need to take stock of. And so then we start to harmonize even more so and say, so within the social sphere, how do you want to operate within your business? Within the biological aspect, what do you want to interact with? What are you drawn towards? And some people are drawn towards chickens. Other people are drawn towards trees. Some people are drawn towards nitrogen-fixing, perennial, subalpine species. And the folks who get there, those are the folks who succeed, because those are the folks who are like, this is what gets me excited.
Huh.
There's this idea of nerdvana. We're all a nerd in something. And once we reach nerdvana, everybody else goes, oh, they're really excited about their aspect. You know, there's the soil doctor down in Mexico. 100 guesses what he does. There's the rainwater master out here on the West Coast. There's the mushroom man in Vancouver. You don't have to ask these people what they do. They are telling the world, this is what I do and this is what I do well. My original business was called Permaculture BC. What do? I do permaculture within British Columbia. I connect people within British Columbia around permaculture. My shoots business was called Eat Shoots and Leaves. What do? We want you to eat shoots and leaves. We eat shoots and leaves. It's a great connection. So when we can be more specific about our loves and our passions and we can communicate them, then people can find us and we can find them. After we create these niches, we use something called backcasting. And backcasting is this idea of looking ahead and saying, what does success look like for me in this niche? How many hours am I working? How much free time do I have? Who are the people I'm working with? What does my business day look like? A lot of people don't think of those questions. Like when you wake up in the morning, what do you want to be doing? Who do you want to be talking to? How much time do you want to be spending on email? How much time do you want to spend here and here and here? And some of those things we can work with and manage, and some of those things we need to design around. And then what we do is we say, the day before that happened, the day before you reached that apex, what did you do? What was the thing you did before that? What happened? The week before, what did you do? The month before, the 2 months, the 3 months, the 6 months, the year. And if they think it's going to take them 2 years to get there, we come all the way back to the day after the course. And so what happens is, in this tiny module, and again, I've expanded this out to a few days, and there'll be a retreat or there'll be a multi-day course coming up here probably within the next year. Even when we take it down to the bare bones, when we distill it, titrate it down to the pure essence, the single malt brandy of it, people get it, they understand it, and they walk out the next day going, I can do this. This isn't difficult. Because really the only thing you need to have a business is a name search and a business license. And it's about $125 and you have a business. That's it, right? You don't even have to have a really good idea to technically have a business. So once you have those little hurdles, those things that people really kind of like, oh, I don't have business cards, and you just look at them and go, and stop it, please. Just, you have a passion. Work the passion. Don't work the rest of it. Just be that essence. And so a lot of people might be thinking at this point who've created small businesses, well, yeah, but you have to be a lot of these other things in the beginning. And that's true. You know, when you start up, you have to be the business owner, you have to be the manager, and you get to be the technician, which is what and how we usually get into business. We love to do this thing. But it doesn't mean that you can't forward cast, you can't forward think or backcast and say, within a couple of months, what I want to have is other people who fill these roles. And maybe they fill these roles with trade, maybe they fill these roles with interaction or aspects within what I yield naturally. Maybe it doesn't mean what I yield in my business isn't how I pay them or reimburse them or value their trade. Maybe it's other aspects of who I am, which are not part of my business. You know, for example, for a while in university, I became really good at writing resumes and understanding people and distilling what they're good at. Shock of shockers, it forecasted to what I do today. But so I've used that as well. I've traded time to help people with resumes, and they've done work for me within my business of permaculture, my other business, or there are a few more businesses coming up in the next year. But it really is that aspect of what do you love, what are you good at, and what do you want to specialize in within X. And that could be permaculture, or it could be becoming an esthetician, or it could be working with dogs. It could be anything, right? But what is your love, and how does it work? The big difference between why I specialize in permaculture is that permaculture is based on 3 ethics: earth care, people care, and fair share. The idea being that we take care of the earth, it takes care of us. It is where we derive all of our health and our wealth from. The second is people care. We take care of the people, and we take care of their biological imperative. And we understand that when people are taken care of, the earth is taken care of. And the other aspect is, if we have to look for fertility clinics, we only have to go to wealthy countries with luxury. And the inverse is true as well. In countries that aren't as well, they have a lot of population boom. And this is a biological imperative of life on Earth. When an ecological element is stress, when a living element is stress, it tries to beget itself. It tries to create more of itself. There is a stress function there. Same thing with apples, mycelium, and people, right? So when we take care of people, we actually take care of population control, which is a really important thing that I don't think a lot of people think about. When we take care of people and they're totally fulfilled on basic needs, and we start to move up the different levels of needs, they cease to have a lot of children en masse. We all know a few people who like to have a football team or a baseball team or lots of kids, and lots of farm families I work with are like that. But the last one is return of surplus. And that means that when the earth is taken care of, there's enough for the people. When the people are taken care of, there's usually excess. And that excess can be returned back to the people and back to the earth. And now we have this regenerative system that cycles back and forth. The same is true for business. The same is true for niches. When we take care of the earth base that provides what we need for our business, and we take care of the people who help support us within our business, we have surplus. And that surplus can go back into both and back into the surrounding economy and community. And it supports everything that has to do with life. Everything that has to do with life. And you end up becoming happy, healthy, and wealthy. And I take exception on how we define wealth.
Right.
The Inuit call wealth a complete and utter understanding of the natural world. I call wealth having surplus and having freedom of choice and having freedom of time. You get to choose what you do with those things, because that's the only thing that matters at the end of the day. So do you spend time installing? Do you spend time growing worms? Do you spend time being a graphic artist who makes maps? And then do you have the time to be able to be with your loved ones? Do you have time to devote to your art? Because we all have an art in us somehow, somewhere. We have a different expression. So that way you yourself can become a more complete system. And it just means that you fill up zone zero and there's more to give to the rest of your attributes and the rest of your needs and your yields. And it's a reciprocating, it is a building system where we get more and more surplus as we start to harmonize with our own natural energies.
Amazing. Love it. It also, it really strikes me how when people figure out that area of specialization or niche, like the soil doctor or the mushroom guy, or what a relief it is for everybody else. It's like, oh, thank God somebody else has taken that one, because I didn't want to do it, but now I have somebody to send those people to. And the other thing I'm really getting from this conversation is how, so I think one way to look at sort of niche is just target market, who are you trying to go after, versus it just really is this interplay of so many different things. It's the overlap of so many different areas of our life, of our passions, our interests, where we want to specialize, that even our lifestyle that we want to have, that all and who we want to be serving, that all kind of contributes to the niche. That's the area in the ecosystem or the marketplace that we're particularly occupying. And you had 3 examples. I'd ask you for examples of niche. You had 3 that I thought were really funny. And so I'm wondering if you could just maybe speak just briefly to each of them, why you think they're such great niche examples. So the first one was the pear schnapps in the Austrian Alps.
Okay.
So what's the story here?
Okay, so I think in all of our industries and all of our occupations, we have crushes. We have crushes on the people who just do phenomenal work, and so they're called perma crushes. And I've got a big crush on Sepp Holzer. He's an Austrian farmer who's been growing at 1,100 to 1,500 meters above sea level. He's 72. He's one of the only people to create and to completely rehydrate 10,000 hectare areas within Russia. After I was working with him, studying with him in Austria, he went and he was the only person to be asked into Chernobyl, only permaculturist to be asked into Chernobyl and say, what would you do here? Because he's had such great success. And the other big thing he's had a huge success in is find niche and saying, okay, I recognize that nature creates niche, and the only thing that's successful within nature is that with which fills a niche and is successful. So he was looking around and he ended up finding that there was this specific pear that the growers in the area would grow, and they would grow at lower elevations than in other places, and they would distill it down into a specific type of schnapps. And so the specifics of this is that in their marketplace, in their environment, there was a culture of drinking high-grade, alcohol that is different taste, and it's part of the culture. And it'd be a great culture to start here in Canada overall, for many reasons. But Sip said, "Well, I think I could grow that where I am now. I think I could grow that at 1,100 to 1,500 meters above sea level. I think I'll need a few more skills to make that happen, and I'll have to experiment, but I'm going to give it a shot because what it could produce, the surplus, the return on energy investment is great." So he started to play around with it. And lo and behold, he put some effort into it and he found that, yes, he could grow these pears. And the pears were closer to market. And they had this flair of being more Austrian and more, they're grown in the Alps and they come down and they're, handcrafted and all this. And so he made quite a bit of money on just this one fruit for this one material processing into a product that was loved and cherished. And that's another big thing, create things that are loved and cherished by people, and you've got a recession-proof business. And so that was a big thing. His farm, the Bernakevitch, now has a sale of jams and jellies. And I was looking at it, and I started talking with his son Joseph about it, and he said it produces between 50 and 75,000 euros a year, jam and jelly. And one jam jar is €1 for them to process, and they sell them for €3. And so they make 2/3 gross profit on each jam jar. And you're making 75,000 euro, and it's about 0.3 conversion today in September 2013. That's a great niche. That's a great niche. And I think the other aspect is we look at waste streams and we look at things that are given away or people don't look at, and we use those and we turn those into surplus. So that was the first one.
I love it. Oh man, what a quote too. The things in nature that survive or thrive are the things that fill a niche. I love it. And it strikes me too, like in business, how if we look into the community of like what's needed, what's not being done, those are all opportunities. Those are all niches. There's spaces in the marketplace or environment where we could be stepping in. And it's funny because I feel like I've done this socially a lot. Like I noticed years ago there was no place where folks who were kind of progressive politically, light green environmental could hang out. And so started the green drinks here in Edmonton, and then started the localgood.ca. And then I noticed, there's no like social thing for the holistic scene. So I started this thing called Indigo Drinks. And the latest one in the spring I'm going to probably launch with some friends. It'll be called the Social Yogi, because I noticed that yoga students go to yoga classes, but there's like no social place for them to hang out, which they really want to do. So we're going to create a series of social events where it's like going to bars, doing karaoke, all sorts of picnics, potlucks, and all this. And
name that yogi. They get up and they do a pose, and everyone out there where it is.
Yeah. But noticing that all came from people are wanting this, even if they don't even know they're wanting it yet.
Yeah.
People are craving it. There's a lack of that there, and so it just occurred to me the importance of people trusting their gut on that. Like when you look out into the community, it's like, what are you missing? What are you craving that you wish was there? But also just to trust your gut. If you feel like something is missing, there's a chance. It's at least worth exploring. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so number 2 was back to roots, the oyster mushrooms grown on coffee grounds.
Yeah, okay. So these two business students, I think they were 22 and 23 at the time, they had either heard of or they'd been a talk of Paul Spence, who's an infamous mycologist, has just the fungus and mushrooms. And Paul Spence said, when you grow mushrooms, one of the most labor-intensive things and energy-intensive things is sterilizing or pasteurizing the substrate, which is the material you grow the mushrooms on. Right? So a lot of people think, mushrooms grow in food. Well, some mushrooms grow in food, but there's a lot of mushrooms in the category called the dead eaters, the detritivores, sometimes called the saprophytic mushrooms. These are the ones we see growing on dead stumps and trees as we walk through the forest. There were these substrates, these materials that were being pasteurized or being sterilized through the process of being used. And one of those pieces is coffee, because coffee is taken to a high degree of temperature, and when it comes out, it's pasteurized or sterilized. And the big thing about that is that when you inoculate, which is when you feed mushroom mycelium, which is the roots of fungus, which is the overall body of it, or the spores, which are the seeds, into the substrate, you have to find time when anything else has colonized the substrate. And so the coffee grounds
in the process of them being coffee grounds, which is great. Think of you being a coffee ground, being like, go through my whole life, and I grow up, and I'm picked, and I'm dehulled, and I'm roasted, and then, I go through the strainer after I'm ground, and then what am I supposed to do? I'm just a totally sterilized substrate. I would just like to do something with my life. Now, if you think of it that way, the same thing as us think about what we do naturally, and mushrooms grow great on coffee ground, specifically oysters, talking a few others. And so these two started growing oyster mushrooms on coffee grounds, and they grew to $1.2 million business in San Francisco off of a waste product. And now they're moving into aquaponics, which is growing fish, vegetables. They're doing these little home kits. So again, it comes down to find a way to stimulate a need that somebody hasn't filled. And when those folks are talking to me like, it would be great to tell you what X, that's a great indication to start thinking about it and seeing if they've actually a need for it in the community. So I've done some experimentation with this as well, and had great success doing it just for home consumption. And now I'm actually growing my psyllium, again, a side business, growing psyllium for post-install landscapes, because it can be quite expensive if you buy it commercially and it comes across from the mainland. So here's another niche I can fill in a 5-gallon bucket, something that I can get back clean and do it again. Cheap, easy, simple. I said it, I sort of forget it, and it's all done.
I love it. Okay, so there was the urban grown, this food crops and tourist destination deserts.
Mm-hmm. Good friend of mine, Curtis Stone, runs Green to the Acres, and he's what's called a spin farmer in Kelowna. Spin stands for small plot intensive, which means you grow on front lots, back lots, side lots. You grow in the city because that's where the market is. So one of the major niches of spin farming is that they close that gap on where you grow and where the market is. The other aspect is his specific way of growing for many years was to use his bicycle to bring it to the restaurants. And so he made a lot of his own needs and yields for fit and being able to move from place to place. And it was this neat little thing that restaurants got to say, my vegetables come by bike. There's no carbon footprint active, right? There's a carbon footprint because the bike was still created, yada, yada, but the active carbon footprint wasn't there. And what I really learned from him is that he grows food in a food desert, which is a tourist attraction. Sometimes Kelowna is called Little Alberta because so much of Alberta will buy summer homes and they'll all come in and all these things. But it's interesting because when you have that tourist destination and it's a food desert, a place that doesn't have as much food that's being grown actively in the area, you have this perfect storm to be a food grower. And you could be growing anything. It could be absolutely anything, I think it's one of the reasons why some of the urban farmers in Edmonton and Calgary do so well is because, well, one, not quite a tourist base, but what we're trying to replicate there is basically a disposable income, a class of people who have a lot of disposable income and who are health conscious and want to really take care of their health. And they're willing to spend the money on good food that doesn't actively destroy us because we are what we eat. So that was a little bit more broad because I wanted people to think about, okay, so where in my area, and this is the other thing I was about to say, there's what you do functionally, there's what you do, and there's where you want to do it. That's another big aspect. And so some of the students who I meet and we go through this process with, they're like, it's actually time to move. It's time to go someplace else. It's actually the climate I've always wanted to live in, and it has the attributes of my function of my niche. So now I get to be in a place that it's easier for me to do that.
It strikes me how with the Zone Zero, you could go through the who, what, where, when, maybe even the why, the how. You could go through all those things and what's Zone Zero, what's Zone One, because there might be a certain group of people that are Zone Zero for you. There might be certain locations that's because it's so funny. I'm so not into the tropics. To the extent that I won I don't know if I ever told you this, I won a $2,000 ticket from the Edmonton International Airport. And I was like, Scotland, Europe, this is awesome. But then when I got the actual ticket, I looked at it, was just for the tropics. All these tourist destination tropical things. And my reaction was just oh, well, maybe there's a nonprofit that can use this. I was so I just gave it to a nonprofit to raise money with. Because I was but for some people, yeah. Beaches, that's Zone Zero. That's where I'm at my best. And me, I'm just wow, that's Zone 4 or something. I'm not drawn there. Yeah. So it strikes me the where and the when too. Some people are morning people. this strange creatures I don't understand. Some people are night owls, and so that, you know, even the time of the day is like could be zone 0 to zone 5.
Yeah. And that's another aspect that starts to come out of this design. It's interesting that in psychiatric circles and in counseling circles, the number one thing that people are looking for is being heard. Just for speaking and being heard. Just. Oh, sorry. And so when we take a look at that and we start to understand that, it's deep listening. You know, a bit of this is deep listening and listening to students and saying what I'm hearing, what I'm trying to pull out of this is what you're saying. And sometimes they don't hear what they're saying themselves.
Totally. Oh man. Well, I heard what you're saying. I love it.
I know. I think the last thing I'll say about it, Tad, is that you know, you brought it up, and I think you brought it up sort of in a roundabout way, but good design starts and ends in observation. Good design starts and ends in observation. It starts with observation to take a lay of the land, to understand the land, and it ends in observation to say what's going well, or my feedback loops, and what needs to change. When we did the shoots and leaves business, we were finding that we were spending a lot of time on aspects of it we weren't crazy about, so we completely changed the business. We changed the product, we changed how we developed it, and we went from 40-plus hours a week to 7.5 hours a week, effectively taking our hourly rate from $7.25, which was about average for farmers, up to $32 an hour, which also became much more profitable for us. And we did that because we said, listen, it's not working for our zone 0 for working environment, not working for our zone 0 for the timing of when we want to be working. And so those things all play a huge factor to understanding your niche and understanding that your niche exists. You know, there's a pot for every lid, and in some of our cases, we have multiple pots and multiple lids, and we like to mix and match and see what's in them and play with them. But it's about observation, understanding your yields, and then looking out into the environment and saying, where is my niche? Where are the needs that are being asked to be met? And then connecting with those people and doing it in a way that provides for the earth, provides for people, and eventually, and this is key, within your design there is a surplus, and that surplus feeds yourself, literally, and it also feeds your soul so that we have more to put back into the people, more to put back to the earth, and you're here in a way that creates permanent culture indefinitely.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking all this time, man. This is the longest conversation I've had so far, but also, man, my favorite. It's just so many examples, and I can't wait to put this up. So if people want to hear more about you, support your work, learn about what you're up to, where should they go?
You can go to my website, permaculturebc.com, and you can email me directly at javan@permaculturebc.com. We've got lots of courses coming up in the next year. I'll be teaching in Alberta. I'll be teaching in BC. I've got some international work down in the States and in Kenya and in Cuba this year. And we've got a great lineup of courses ranging from permaculture design certificates to short courses on food forestry, soil, and more on subcultures work, and even more on life design. So find your niche in permaculture.
I can't wait to, tell me when you get the life design stuff out, because I totally want to spread the word on that.
That would be great, Todd.
Yay. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody. And if you want to check out the Niching for Hippies course that's coming up, it's nichingforhippies.com. And we'll see you later.